On the 20th of June, 1944, in a quiet headquarters building on the island of Oahu, a piece of paper was signed into existence that would, almost exactly 1 year later, sign the death warrant of the man who created it. This is the story of how the United States 10th Army came to be, and how the general who built it from nothing would not live to see it finish what it started. The man chosen to command this new force was Lieutenant General Simon Bolivar Buckner Jr., a name that carried its own strange historical weight, for his father, Simon Bolivar Buckner Sr., had been a Confederate general who surrendered Fort Donelson to Ulysses S. Grant in 1862, and now, 82 years later, the son stood at the head of one of the largest American field armies ever assembled in the Pacific, a soldier determined to prove himself on his own terms. Buckner arrived in Hawaii fresh from a different kind of war, having spent nearly 3 years commanding the defense of Alaska, overseeing the brutal, frost-bitten campaigns against Japanese forces on Attu and Kiska in the Aleutian Islands, a theatre so remote and so often overlooked, that it earned the bitter nickname the Forgotten War, yet it was there that Buckner built almost 300 military installations from nothing and forged the disciplined, exacting command style that would define him for the rest of his career. When the call finally came to leave Alaska for an active combat theatre, Buckner did not hesitate, and on that June day at Pearl Harbor, the 10th Army was activated as the newest and ultimately the last Field Army Command formed in the Pacific War, a force conceived for a mission that at the moment of its birth did not yet exist, because the original plan was Operation Causeway, the invasion of Formosa, the island known today as Taiwan, a campaign that planners believed would be necessary to sever Japan's supply lines to Southeast Asia and provide a staging ground for the eventual assault on the Japanese home islands. But war plans are written in pencil, not ink, and barely a month after Buckner's army came into being, a pivotal conference convened at Pearl Harbor itself, bringing together President Franklin D. Roosevelt, Admiral Chester Nimitz, and General Douglas MacArthur, 3 men whose disagreements over Pacific strategy had simmered for years. And out of that meeting came a decision that would quietly erase Formosa from the map of American intentions and replace it with the Philippines, leaving Buckner's brand new army without a mission, a powerful instrument with nowhere yet to strike. For months, the 10th Army existed in a strange limbo, training, drilling, and absorbing units on Oahu, while its ultimate target remained undecided. And it was during this period, on September 4, 1944, that Buckner formally assumed command, inheriting a force unlike anything the Army had built before, because the 10th Army was structured as a genuinely joint command, fusing the US Army's Toitoi Teen Corps with the US Marine Corps' Thruchi Amphibious Corps under a single unified headquarters, the first time in the war that Army and Marines divisions would fight together at this scale, under one Field Army commander, a structural experiment that demanded diplomacy as much as discipline, since Buckner now had to weld together 2 services with different traditions, different tactics, and no small amount of institutional rivalry into a single fighting machine. By the time the target was finally fixed, it was not Formosa and it was not the Philippines, but a smaller, stranger objective that almost no one outside military planning circles had heard of, the island of Okinawa, the largest of the Ryukyu chain, a piece of land barely 60 miles long, that would become the staging ground for the planned invasion of Japan itself, and under the codename Operation Iceberg, Buckner's 10th Army swelled to roughly 183,000 men, organised into 7 combat divisions supported by tank battalions, amphibious tractor units, and a naval and air armada of staggering size, making it one of the most powerful single-field armies the United States ever sent into combat. On April 1st, 1945, Easter Sunday, the men Buckner had spent nearly a year training waded ashore on Okinawa's beaches in what would become the largest amphibious assault of the Pacific War, and what followed was 82 days of some of the most savage fighting of the entire conflict, a grinding battle of caves, ridgelines, and fortified hills that came to be known among the men who survived it as the Typhoon of Steel, a campaign that would ultimately cost more than 12,000 American lives and leave nearly 40,000 wounded. Buckner commanded from the front, a habit carried over from his Alaska days, regularly visiting forward observation posts to assess the fighting with his own eyes rather than relying solely on reports from the rear, And it was this same instinct for proximity to the battle that brought him, on the afternoon of June 18th, 1945, to an observation post near the front lines, watching the advance of one of his favourite Marine regiments, when a Japanese artillery shell struck nearby, hurling a fragment of shattered coral into his chest, and within minutes, the man who had built the 10th Army from a blank piece of paper at Pearl Harbor was dead, becoming the highest-ranking American officer killed by enemy fire in the entire Second World War. The date itself carries a chilling symmetry, for Buckner fell just 2 days short of the one-year anniversary of the very order that had brought his army into existence. A full circle closing almost to the day, the general who activated a force destined for a battle he could not have named in June of 1944 was struck down by that same battle in June of 1945. With victory on Okinawa already in sight, but not yet secured. Command passed first to Marine Major General Roy Geiger, who became the first Marine Corps officer ever to lead a field army, and then to General Joseph Stilwell, who guided the 10th Army through the campaign's final days and oversaw its eventual disbandment in October 1945, after the atomic bombings of Hiroshima and Nagasaki rendered the planned invasion of Japan and the Army's next intended mission unnecessary. What remains today is the quiet, almost overlooked moment of June 20th, 1944, a single bureaucratic act of activation that set in motion the formation, the training, the strategic pivot, and ultimately the sacrifice that would define one of the Pacific War's bloodiest campaigns. A reminder that the story of any great battle does not begin with the first shot fired on the beach, but months or even years earlier in a quiet room, with the stroke of a pen, and the quiet certainty that the man signing the order had no idea it would also, 1 year later, sign his own fate.